Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Around the Big Ten podcast. I'm Mark Givler, got Chip Minnick with me as always. We are continuing our Big Ten pre-spring look-ins. Again, 3 pressing issues, major topics to be aware of with every Big Ten program, one at a time. We are on Penn State today. Amazing season for Penn State. I didn't end the way they wanted. They had a chance there, a very good chance to get to the national championship game for a rematch against Ohio State. Just came up a little bit short, but a very strong year for Penn State that I think, are James Franklin's critics silent? No. Did he hold off the pitchforks for at least another year or two? Absolutely. Really strong year for the program. A lot of good things happening there. They have a chance to maybe even have the number 1 pick in the NFL draft coming up. So a lot of things they can kind of take to the recruiting trail this offseason as they continue to try and get to the top of the mountain here. One thing, and we talked about this before, so we're not going to harp on this too much. They got a lot of guys back, and there are some parallels here to like what Ohio State did last year when they had a bunch of guys on the fence with the NFL, and they pretty much all decided to come back. Penn State, very similar thing. Drew Aller, Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, like all those guys coming back. Great. But the big issue for them last year, at least in my opinion, was a lack of playmakers on the outside at wide receiver. Who can you count on out there? That's our elephant in the room here going into the spring, Chip. Like, where is the wide receiver production going to come from? Who's going to step up and be a legitimate number 1 receiver, especially now that you don't have Tyler Warren?
It's a tremendous question because when you look at what Penn State did receiving, okay, they're losing Tyler Warren, they're losing Harrison Wallace to Ole Miss, Omari Evans is going to Washington, and now you're down to when it comes to again, like nothing against Nicholas Singleton, but that receiver out of the backfield, which is fine. They have Liam Clifford coming back. I genuinely. And I'm not saying this to be snarky, I genuinely feel bad that, like Julian Fleming, I really had high hopes for him when he made the move from Ohio State to Penn State. So I guess my long-winded answer to your very good question is, based on the limited activity that Penn State had within the transfer portal, maybe it's Kyron Hudson who's coming in from Southern Cal. But that's putting a lot on one guy. That I think like maybe it's going to be a combination of Hudson and, like I just mentioned, Liam Clifford, but they have to develop a better passing attack than what we've seen on the field for Penn State.
Yeah, they've kind of rolled the dice here. They bring in Kyron Hudson from USC. They bring in Devontae Ross from Troy, and they're essentially banking on those 2 guys to not only replace what they lost, but be better than what they lost. And so that's the gamble that's out there. They were not, as you mentioned, they were very, I think, precise in the portal. And James Franklin talked about this at his winter press conference, just, how they, from a culture standpoint, they don't want to be going in and basically, I'm paraphrasing what he said, but they don't want to be going in and being a school that takes 25 new players every year out of the transfer portal. And I generally,
I get it.
Yeah. Like and really that's not so different than how like Ohio State's done it.
Right.
They've got a lot of, $20 million roster, but like they're essentially a school that goes into the portal every year and says, we need like 8 to 10 guys. We're going to be highly precise with what we look for. And we're going to go attack those couple of holes we need to patch up. And Penn State did that. Now, was it enough at receiver? Look, Devontae Ross had a really good year last year. It was at Troy. So you have to take a little bit of that with a grain of salt, but 76 catches, 1,043 yards, 11 touchdowns. That's a significant season. I mean, that's a great season. So can he carry that over? And he's kind of known as a speed guy. So can he give them that deep threat that they sorely, sorely need? There are so few questions, in my opinion, this offseason that actually not only have a lot of say in how the college football playoff field is going to look, but legitimately questions that could shape the national championship picture. Penn State's wide receiver room, in my opinion, will help shape the national championship picture. If they get really good play from their receivers, they're going to be a contender. If they don't, they're one of the, there's 5 or 6 schools I think we're all talking about right now could win a championship next year. You can cross them off the list. But if they get improved receiver play, they are right there on that list. So there are so few topics we're going to talk about that legitimately have national championship implications. I think this is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Penn State, I've said it before. They definitely, at the critical position of, at quarterback, they have Drew Aller back. They have Nicholas Singleton. They have Katron Allen back. I know we're going to talk about, kind of the changes that they have on defense. It's just basically a matter of, can they have just a better passing game to, give, like Drew Aller, just some diversity. I for lack of a better word, it's like that they can't, nothing wrong with hitting Tyler Warren. It worked for them, but just, like more of an effective down the field, kind of, bring you to, like your, to your feet, like, okay, like they're going deep, like that kind of legitimate concern. They haven't done that in so many years that it's, I don't want to say it's easy to play Penn State, because it isn't, because look at the results on the field. They were in the college football playoff. They're a good team, but that's the missing element right there offensively. If they can get that figured out, like you said, they are definitely one of those teams. We've talked about it before. Penn State is definitely going to be in the conversation for not only winning the Big Ten, but being in the college football playoff.
They have to find their KJ Hamler 2.0. They've got to find a KJ Hamler. Bottom line, we're going to find out pretty quickly because teams are going to dare them to throw at the beginning of the year. They're going to load the box. They're going to dare Penn State to throw the ball down the field. And so we'll find out pretty quickly, I think, if this is a team that's made improvements there. Another big thing. It's funny. I think there's like 5 or 6 questions nationally that like can shape the national championship picture, and maybe 2 of them are Penn State. How much of a transition will it be for the Penn State defense to go from Tom Allen to Jim Knowles, a defensive coordinator? Chip?
I think it's going to be substantial. And that's not meant to, that's not a knock on, because I always respected, and I still do respect Tom Allen as a defensive coordinator. And obviously I have tremendous respect for the job that Jim Knowles, as you can see from the results on the field, for the job he did at Ohio State. The reason why I think it's going to be a bigger transition than I think people understand is that I'm going based on what Jim Knowles publicly said when he was at Ohio State, that he used to say that, okay, it takes about 3 years for my system to be fully implemented. The fact that it's a safety driven defense. Say what you will about, like the idea of like a 4-2-5. And I realize, we've kind of, snickered and joked about like, oh, like the jack and things like that. I don't think it's necessarily a question of personnel that Penn State may have or may be lacking. I think it's just a matter of making sure that, Jim Knowles, he likes to think of himself as kind of a tinkerer and kind of like a mad scientist, scheme and, drawing things up. How exotic is that going to be in year 1? I don't know. I think that, Jim Knowles, he has to be fair to the players that are on that roster and kind of assess the talent level of what he has and kind of put them in the best positions to be successful. But I think anytime that you go from doing things one way to a completely different way, there's always an adjustment period. So I think it's going to be a little bigger than the average college football fan realizes.
Yeah, I generally agree with that. That here's a bit of the issue with that. And it's not like anyone's job is on the line right now, but this is a team that's very much built to win this year. They've put a lot of chips into the middle for winning this year. Mm-hmm. He's going to have to, the challenge for Jim Knowles is like, you don't have like 3 years to come up with an effective deal. Like you have to have some things ready to go right out of the gate. Now they've got some talent in that back seven. They always seem to have, they come up with guys up front constantly. And we'll actually speak to that here in a minute, but you've got a good lump of clay to work with here to mold. So Knowles is going to have to find the balance between teaching his system and following his process, but also, again, maybe doing some things year one that need to be done, regardless of whether he thinks they're ready, regardless of if that's his ideal process or not. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how he marries those two philosophies. But yeah, this will be a big question for them. Again, they have the pieces on defense. It's hard to imagine, even losing Abdul Carter, it's hard to imagine the defense just all of a sudden, plummets. You would expect Penn State to once again be a top 10 type of defense, but that's going to be on Knowles and the rest of that staff to make sure that is kept up. So big question again in the spring is how that defense looks. We'll be hearing a lot about, the offense and the guys they have back. Well, how's the defense looking against those guys, in the spring? So that'll be a big thing. And then finally, we talked about it. They were very much a precision portal team. They were not a, fish with dynamite, bringing 25 new guys type of approach. But there's some guys here, again, which of these portal additions can make the biggest impact for Penn State in 25, Chip?
I'm going to go with Eni White, Philadelphia kid. We talked about the loss of Abdul Carter, and I completely agree with you. I think, Penn State, defensively, they're always good. But I just think that, like you said, I like the way that you refer to it as being very precise and selective in terms of how they addressed their needs within the transfer portal. But Eni White at defensive end, he's from Philadelphia. Maybe he looks at this as an opportunity to get, obviously be closer to home. Was at Texas A&M, so maybe I have no idea what was offered or what was discussed. But maybe he took this as an opportunity to come in and possibly play the same type of role that Abdul Carter did as like that designated pass rusher for that Penn State defense.
Yep. And look, they get, everyone's so focused on the offense and kind of what they've got coming back and everything else. But to their credit, they also get Danny Dennis Sutton back. And so back on that defensive line as another weapon on that defensive line. And he had weighed his NFL options. So that was a big return for them. But I agree with you. I think Eni White is a huge one for them. It did not work out perfectly at Texas A&M. But that being said, there's a lot of guys who went into Texas A&M, highly recruited defensive linemen, that either have had to transfer out or they're going to be drafted higher than what their production's been. Like you look at the NFL draft this year, there's some guys from A&M getting talked about maybe being first round picks who didn't really produce that much at A&M. So they have not really maximized their defensive line there over the last few years. And so there's no reason to think a change of scenery for Eni White couldn't help him. Penn State, if there's one thing Penn State has done the last several years, it's maximize their D linemen. They've gotten so many good defensive linemen out of that program in the last few years. They've really developed those guys well. That's a huge one for me. Obviously, the receivers. I mean, we talked about those two receivers they've got coming in, and we know that they're going to have to get some stuff out of those guys. But I think Eni White, his ability to give them another pass rusher, another weapon on that defensive line, that's going to be a really big key for Penn State's season and kind of help Jim Knowles out. Because here's the other thing, there was so much talk about Jim Knowles at Ohio State. Is this his defense, or is this, is Ryan Day getting too involved? Is Larry Johnson, blocking him from doing what he wants to do? All these things, they changed some things mid-season. What is the Jim Knowles defense at this point? Because the things we saw at Oklahoma State and the things we saw at Ohio State were at times very different. And so I think that's another thing to kind of build off 2 and 3 here as we talk about Eni White and we talk about the transition is, what is that going to look like? So there's so many cool questions about this program that's, going to be a preseason top 5 team. But there's still like all these cool things to talk about here, and that we won't really know the answers to these things until at least after spring, but probably not until September. So big year for them, obviously. High expectations, Chip. Like, final thoughts here on just everything we've talked about and what this team is kind of in line for this year.
Well, I mean, I realize that we're not going to do our schedule analysis until after the spring. It's going to be interesting because, I've said it before, and I know that you're of a similar mindset. We've talked about Oregon in a previous show. These programs are on a collision course, and it's relatively early in the season, which is going to be, I'm not saying it's going to make or break either respective teams' conference aspirations, but conference championship aspirations. But the fact that it's relatively early in the season, and it's going to help shape the conference championship race. So I think if Penn State can, like we've been talking about, if they can develop a better passing attack, if they can assimilate into Jim Knowles' defense, whatever. I agree with you. Like we never really knew, if Ohio State truly implemented it or not. And I don't think we'll get that completely answered in year one at Penn State either. But how that is going, and then just not to sound like a pessimist, but making sure everyone stays healthy. Like there is nothing that is so potentially deflating to a team to have injuries. Ohio State had their share and were able to navigate it, even with some hiccups and kind of holding your breath and let's just kind of like bare knuckle, let's get through this, and they did on the offensive line. My point being is, like, for Penn State, okay, it's like you said, they pushed all of their chips into the center of the table, and so much is riding on a lot of these guys coming back and coming together. So it's going to be an interesting year for sure for Penn State. And
to the point, like with Knowles and these portal additions, like this is going to have to come together somewhat quickly, given that they do play Oregon early. It's the end of September, I think, is when.
Yes, you got it. You got it.
So they're going to have to kind of have this thing together, because that's a bigger game for Penn State.
Yes.
Than it is for Oregon, because Penn State will still have to play at Ohio State later. Oregon and Ohio State do not play this year in the regular season. And I think everyone is looking at those three schools. Obviously, there's other schools that are going to try and crash the party, but I think those are going to be probably the preseason top 5 or 6 schools in the rankings. So like Penn State puts itself in a bit of a hole if it loses that game early versus what Oregon would have a little bit of a better recovery plan without having to play Ohio State. So that'll be interesting to see how quickly this can all come together. But again, you look at these teams on paper around the country, you look at them, I look at them, I think there's like 6 teams maybe I would look at right now, 7 maybe at the most, that I think, that team could win the national championship next year. Penn State's one of them.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
Like it's just a matter of putting these things together. So that'll do it for this one. We'll be back to reassess things after the spring, do a schedule analysis, and we talking ball throughout the spring here on the Around the Big Ten podcast. If you're not already subscribed, please do so to the channel. That helps us. It helps other people that are interested in college football, Penn State football, find us. And you can also subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. You can find us there as well. So hope everyone's enjoying these. Let us know in the comments what we got right, what we got wrong, what we missed, what we were right on, if anything, but mostly what we got wrong, because that's how you improve, right? We have to fix. We have to have a growth process here. But let us know in the comments, especially if you're a Penn State fan. Your thoughts on our assessment of the big questions around this team going into the spring. And again, we'll be back here soon with another one. So thanks again for watching and listening.